Welcome everybody to the AtlanTec Festival. Our 2021 theme is Thriving Through Digital Transformation. And we're halfway through the week, so I hope you're all very much enjoying it. Being virtual certainly makes it more accessible, and we have people joining us from all over the world, including our presenter Laura, who's joining us today from San Francisco. So a pretty early start for Laura. For the whole festival, you can follow us on Twitter at AtlanTecFest and use the hashtag AtlanTec. My name is Karen Conway. I've worked with Fidelity Investments for 18 years now, covering a variety of roles, and I've spent time in the US, Europe, and Asia with Fidelity. From an ITAG perspective, I'm involved in the Digital Women's Forum, driving diversity and inclusion in the west of Ireland. And more recently, I joined the rejuvenated AI and Deep Learning Forum to understand more and broaden my knowledge on AI. And I'm delighted to be your event moderator today. You can use the Q&A function to tell us what you're hoping to get from today's session and ask any questions from Laura. I'll read out the questions for you, so there's absolutely no need to be shy. The Q&A function can be found down in the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see three dots there. If you click that, beside the chat, there's three dots. Click on that and you'll find the Q&A function there. So feel free to use that and add that to any questions you choose. So with that, I'm pleased to welcome Laura Delizonna today to speak to us on psychological safety. This is the #1 driver of performance and is essential for creating an inclusive environment where everybody can bring their best. The highly actionable how-to session today will equip participants with the research-based frameworks and takeaways to build psychological safety in one-to-ones, teams, and supervisor relationships. A little background on Laura. She's a Stanford instructor, executive coach, and international speaker. She specializes in the practical, science-based behaviors and mindsets that drive effective leadership, team performance, and innovation. Recent enterprise clients include Google, Facebook, Disney, McKinsey, and Uber. With expertise in psychological safety, resilience, emotional intelligence, and effective team building, she equips leaders with practical tools to lead measurable, long-term behavioral transformation. She's taught at Stanford Continuing Studies for 15 years, and she's delivered keynotes and workshops in 16 countries and has published 4 books. Her Harvard Business Review article on high-performing teams has 1.5 million views and has achieved the top 3 articles of 2019. She completed a PhD at Boston University and doctoral research at Stanford and Harvard. I have included some links over here in the chat, so if you want to click on those and save them for later, there's a link to her book and her Harvard Business Review article. So I think we're in for a very exciting session today with Laura. So thanks very much, Laura. We're delighted to have you on board. And just a reminder, if people want to use the Q&A function. So with that, Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And Karen, thank you for being such a partner with this and that wonderful introduction. I'm very excited to be here with you today. This topic is so important to me. I think it's so important for all of us, especially at this time in this global standing. Psychological safety is a concept, is a skill set. And this skill set enables us to connect not only in our one-on-one relationships, in our team relationships, but to create societies, to create cultures within these societies, whether that society is the enterprise, whether it is in a global community in the way we communicate and relate. So that's the framework for today. I want you to be thinking, how does this show up in my life, in my one-on-one relationships, in my team, in my organization, and even scaling up? How does this concept, this climate of psychological safety impact the way we are communicating on a global stage? "2021, I think we would all agree, is a time to reimagine. If there's ever been a time, now is the time to ask that question, how could we create a better future? And I think that we've gotten some clues that perhaps our ancestors from millennia ago have been whispering and begging us to learn the lessons to get it right this time. I look to the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This, I believe, points us into the direction of how we can create that better future. But the thing is, we're going to need a new skill set, right? We face global challenges, we face day-to-day challenges in our personal and professional lives that require great agility and adaptivity. It requires great collaboration and complex thinking. And so our old skill sets no longer are going to work. We need a new skill set. So to start with this, I want you to think of a leader who you have had in your own personal life who has helped you achieve an extraordinary outcome. Please type into the chat box some qualities or some actions that this leader took that enabled you to rise to your best self, to rise to your better nature and achieve perhaps what even seemed unimaginable to you at the time. So let's see what we have in comments of what actions those leaders were taking for you. So think back throughout today of your own experience and reflect from the inside out of what you experienced and let that guide the way. So Shauna says, trust and belief. We have another trust from Ollie. Okay, we have, let's see, there's so many coming in. Emily, openness and active listening. More trusts from Siobhan. Jane, confidence and support. Thank you, Jane. And Roizen says, challenged. Belief in my potential allowed me to make controlled mistakes. Grace says, clear direction. You see some of these themes that are coming up. So this ability to have clarity, to believe in, to relate at a personal level, keep reflecting on those. So we see that these are some of the skill sets of emotional intelligence. This is a model they created to really put things kind of in order, that a team actually has a hierarchy of needs, just like an individual. And at the foundation, there's emotional intelligence. This is the ability at the personal level to have situational awareness, self-awareness, social awareness, perspective, and that magic quality, sometimes it seems, of adaptability and flexibility. From there, we have the power to cultivate the conditions for psychological safety, where we can get that trust, where people can feel that things are fair and that there is a stable base on which they can bring their best work and bring out their best ideas. That is true collaboration that can then build off of that psychological safety allows. Those inclusive teams where everyone has not only a voice, a seat at the table, but a voice in the conversation, where there's empathy and true understanding, at least attempts at understanding, and recognition for jobs well done, and the skill sets that each critical member of the team brings. Then people feel inspired to bring their best to do those learning experiments that drive true innovation. So we must keep this in mind. This is actually a call to action for leaders to build these skill sets so that we can reach that pinnacle of innovation and breakthrough performance. So let's define it. Psychological safety is an interpersonal climate. It's an invisible force that drives the relationship, the way that people interact, the way they think, the way they interpret information, and it enables individuals to take risks and be vulnerable. We all know what this feels like. This is when there's a team or a relationship where a simple, honest mistake is not a big deal, where it's noticed and it's owned and corrected, but nobody's getting thrown under the bus, right? Have you ever been in a situation, in contrast, where you held back an idea, you held back your perspective because you felt like it's not going to be received so well? Or you felt like your team members or your leader made you feel like you had no place there or you didn't belong. You might have been in a team with low psychological safety. Have you ever been harshly criticized when you made an error and it felt unfair or unjust or extreme? Have you felt silenced? Maybe your voice was not was talked over, or it wasn't actually welcome. These are all signs of a team that is suffering from low psychological safety. We all know what this feels like, and we all agree that this is important, right? But the thing is, most leaders get it wrong. I was working with a CFO, an executive coaching client of mine. He said to me, I'll call him Jay. Jay said, Laura, I get it. He realized his team had low psychological safety with him. He said, you have to realize every day I have to bring bad news to my team and my organization. I'm the CFO. It's my job to be an asshole. I said, Jay, I get it. However, you're missing a critical component here. Psychological safety is not about being nice. He had told me how he had a team member who he said 5 times I told him to put this piece in the report, and he sent it out. You wouldn't believe it. He sent it out without that piece in the report. This was our biggest client. I said, Jay, if that team member had felt like there was enough of a relationship with you where he could oppose you, where he could say, you know what, I don't really agree with putting this in. I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm not going to do it. Then maybe you could have a discussion. This is about the creative process. And then you would have found out before the report went out. It's not about job security. It's not about making everyone feel good. It's certainly not about keeping the peace and harmony. And it's not about putting on, the soft gloves, the kid gloves, and sugarcoating feedback. It's instead about being direct and honest and having those tough conversations where we can maintain the bonds without rupturing the relationship where people feel they must hide, pretend, and fake. I said, John, this psychological safety is the answer to an evolutionary-based question. And that question is, are you with me or against me? That question will drive a host of behaviors and attitudes that will predict performance and impact performance. So I want you to think about your experience again for a moment. Think of someone or a situation where you felt like you were excessively criticized. There was that sort of toxic competition against you, where people were not on your side or an individual was not on your side. What did this make you feel? What did you feel as a result of this? What did you feel like you wanted to do, or maybe you did do? Enter this into the chat. See if you can capture it in just a word or two. When you were in a situation where you felt excessively criticized, where there was competition against you, where you felt it was not safe to bring out your best. Joe says that he felt uneasy. One person says, I quit. I don't blame you, right? It's an unpleasant place to be. Silence, Grace. Yes, so often the biggest sign of psychological safety when it's low is silence. Felt depressed. Someone else left their role. Yeah, the old adage that people quit managers, not companies. Frustrated, defensive, says Ollie. Absolutely, and more. So are we at our best? No, clearly we are not. These are very natural reactions when we feel attacked, when we feel belittled, when we feel criticized. And that's what we see from the research, is that avoidance and defense behaviors ensue. People avoid conflict, they hide errors, they go into name calling and pointing. Maybe they're not making that explicit, but it happens under the waterline. Sometimes the sign of low psychological safety is when everyone's posturing and having it all together, right? As opposed to being honest when they're overwhelmed, admitting errors, doing self-reflection, and having conversations where people feel cared for, but there's that care and candor. So people are honest, they're direct. And so clearly these lead to the conditions where we have tremendous potential for high performance, where people can leverage their strengths and bring their voice into the conversation and their best ideas. And this is why these are companies that I've recently worked with. Psychological safety is being identified as an essential factor in this modern era where we need these skill sets. So I want you to think now for yourself, where are you? How much psychological safety do you feel on your team? And Karen, would you mind helping me out here to launch the poll, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
I am now the presenter. Share content. Now, can everybody see my screen? I think we're probably good. So just if anybody, so you can look at the QR code through your phone on a camera, and if that does not work for you, you can jump to slido.com and enter this participant number. So we've got 2 polls today. This is our first one, and we'll run our second one after that. So if people want to start entering their answers, I will do it along with you.
Okay, so we have some answers coming in. Think about those behaviors that you notice in yourself, that feeling sense of, are these folks with me, against me? What happens when I make an error or feel that overwhelm? Okay, we see some responses rolling in. If you haven't gotten a chance to enter your responses, please keep it coming. I think you're going to find this very interesting. Okay, just another moment and then we'll close the polls.
I can give it another couple of seconds before we jump to the second poll.
And great, thank you.
Okay. I think I will jump to the second one. Comfortable with that?
Yeah, let's go for it. So the second question is, how much psychological safety do you believe that your team feels with you? So as you answer this, I want you to try to be as objective as possible. Not how much you wish they felt, but in those moments when maybe you pressed send but should have pressed save on that email, or were tired and hungry and stressed out and maybe had a tone, make sure you were paying attention to those moments as well. How much psychological safety do you believe that your team likely feels with you? Now, of course, the only person to judge how much psychological safety they feel is the individual themselves. But it's very important as leaders to try to take their perspectives, to try to understand their emotional state, right? And what we know also from the research is that the higher that a leader goes up in the organization, in the hierarchy, the lower their self-awareness is. So one practice to offset that tendency for lower self-awareness is to pause and do just what you're doing right now, and to think about, how am I received? How does my team feel? How are they thinking? And that can help offset that tendency. Now, it's not the leader's fault, right? Because one of the reasons why this happens is because feedback happens less often. So when you're in a position of power, of course, people want to tell you only part of the story oftentimes, especially in low psychologically safe environments. Looks like we have most of the people have participated in this poll. Final responses now, please. And then we'll close the polls in a moment and we'll see what the results are.
On a positive, we have 0 at very low.
Excellent. That is great.
A win.
That is wonderful to hear. I'm not surprised that this is a highly psychologically safe team here, group of leaders. Okay. It often happens that what we're really best at, then we see the value in and we seek it out as well. So let's see what these results are. Thank you, Karen.
I can stop sharing. Now back
Okay.
to Laura for you to present again.
Okay, and then we'll have the results. And can we get the results showed up on the screen?
They were up there that time, Laura, so it was 55% at high and 38% at
Okay.
moderate.
Okay, could we get that back up again, actually? Let's
Of
take a
course.
look at it and talk about it a little bit. So, first, with your own level of psychological safety. Okay, so it looks like we have about a third of folks are at a high level. You can read this yourself as well. And a moderate, definitely skewed towards the higher end. So that's great. So most people in the room are feeling a higher level of psychological safety. And those who are at the lower end, sometimes that's why we're here, right? To really see what we can do to change that. And, that moderate level, because this is the #1 driver of high performing teams, let's see what we can do to even up that so that we're all at a very high level, which is only at 12% here. Great. Let's move on to the next one, Karen, just for another review of that. Some of you may not have seen that. So we're seeing 3% at a very high level. Excellent. Congratulations to those creme de la cremes. And at a high level, still substantial. Like I was saying, I'm very impressed with that. And that's good news, right? Moderate level is still substantial. So let's dig into how to increase that psychological safety across the board. Now, as we're moving through the how-tos, really be thinking about on a day-to-day basis, like tomorrow, what will I do differently to increase this level of psychological safety with my direct reports, in my relationships, on one-on-one, and in my team. You can even, by the way, practice this with your family and friends. Psychological safety exists in every relationship. I call it the 4 C's. The 4 C's of psychological safety. These are the pillars, the competencies, I like to think of them as, where the most powerful actions lie for a leader to create psychological safety in their team. So let's unpack this a bit. The first one, we start with care. Care, think about it when you feel cared for. This is about relating human to human. We're not just cogs in the wheel. We're not just resources to be utilized, but this is about relating human to human. As Maya Angelou famously said, that people will forget what you said and what you did, but it's how you feel that really lands the impact. And this is what these invisible forces, again, this is what builds the bonds, that sense of belonging, and and drives truly effective problem solving. So I want you to think about, again, for yourself. Think of a leader who you believe cared for you as a person. What did you feel as a result of this care? What did you do as a result of this care? So, in a word, what was that feeling sense that you had? What did that care result in? What was the bigger piece? Confident, Grace says. Thank you. Let's see. Enthused, loyalty, yeah. Understood and respected, motivated, Fergal says, thank you. These are really powerful, visible. You feel seen, Greta. Thank you for that. And D says, trust again. This really is the undercurrent, not to be underestimated. Now, what I want to emphasize is that this is not about like, kumbayaing or we're talking always about emotions, but this is about an important virtuous cycle where care does drive trust and psychological safety. And that then drives more ability to be candid, because then we don't have the defenses up, right? And this is so important now even more when we're working in hybrid teams, when we're working in remote environments. It's just going to get stickier and stickier. So this is a quote that I found from a senior manager at Google who I was speaking to in a one-on-one. And back in April 2020, we all know when that was, right? What was happening then. He said to his senior manager, look, at best, you've got 3 good hours in me per day. And if that's not okay, I have to take leave. So the point is that in the new environment we are in, it's only going to get more and more, that we've seen so much in the past year, how working from home blurs the boundary between work and life. And what that requires then is that managers have to go into this territory they've never been into before, really, in a major way. They have to go into the previously off-limit personal circumstances come into play. When they're making workflow decisions, coordination with the team, suddenly these work-life issues might be in the forefront. And so we, in a big way, need to be able to talk about some of these interpersonal factors, some of these personal factors. That's sticky, right? That is not an easy thing. There's even legalities to that and personal bias that can come into play. So this is uncharted territory in a major way, and this is a call for even higher levels of psychological safety. Think about that. I think we would all agree we cannot emphasize this the most. So we need to have agility and fluidity in our ability to venture into these more difficult and complex areas. So I want to give you some best practices. Showing interest goes a long way, right? And how do you do that? It's essentially, discovering the person behind the position. It's maybe it's starting with empathy. I call these experiments because try them out, see what happens, modify them, iterate. And so they're practices, they're applications, but more than anything else, they are behavioral experiments that I encourage you to run. In remote team practices, people are always asking me, but what about remote? How can we build psychological safety when we're not even in the same room? And to sum it up, when working in a remote environment, those spontaneous moments of connection do not happen. Instead, now they need to be intentionally crafted and brought in to the environment so that teams still have an opportunity to connect. So, for example, do a team check-in. Some of you, I'm sure, already do this. One of the examples I love of this is what McKinsey does. They do the pie check-in, where team members, just for 15 seconds, I don't know, this doesn't take much time. Each person shares what their physical, that P, the intellectual state they're in, and their emotional state. Now, notice how this is still relatively safe. You can go as deep or as not. Or as surface, depending on what you're personally comfortable with. Asking for lowlights and highlights of the week, or sweet and sours is a fun way to say this, where Keith Ferrazzi created this, is that asking your team, what's one sweet and one sour thing that happened in your personal or professional life? They can choose, right? A Google senior manager that I recently was working with said that she creates rituals in her team. So when there's a holiday, maybe it's Diwali, maybe it's New Year's, maybe it's St. Patrick's Day, then asking, how do you share this? How do you celebrate in your life? And so notice how this gives people an opportunity, an invitation, but not a demand to share whatever they would like to share. But it's a way for us to get to know each other, to break that barrier, and to see just a glimpse of that person behind the position. And so ask as well, ask things about their lives and then circle back. Oh, so I know you had a weekend with your kids how did it go? Those small moments of remembering what matters to the person in front of you can build those bonds of belonging and lead to that personal sort of like the relationship, investing in the relationship bank account that you can call upon when conflict erupts, when tension arises. Supporting development is huge. Google did a study where they said, who are their best managers? What do? They support development. They're the best coaches. That was the #1 factor that predicted the performance of a manager. McKinsey did a study of thousands of people of managers to see what was the best managers. What did the best managers do? They supported development. Don't underestimate the power of this. To assess where is my team and advise them when appropriate and advocate. So small acts of kindness can be ways to do that. Introductions, asking simply, what do you need from me so that you can do your job better? And to call out the elephant in the room when people are burning out, when they're overwhelmed, what do they need for self-care? What do they need to prevent burnout? So it's having, and sometimes, these difficult conversations. The second C is even more difficult is the bad news. We're starting easy and working up for most of us. Courage. Courage is about being honest with the messy. It's about going into that unknown territory that we don't necessarily want to go into, that might be embarrassing, vulnerable, and who wants to feel vulnerable? The courageous do. That's where the power is. The #1 action that a leader can choose to take is to model vulnerability. That is the #1 action that will increase the psychological safety in your team so that you can create a culture where, as Ray Dalio so famously has exemplified in his company, it's acceptable to make mistakes, but it's unacceptable to learn from them. But you must, if you aspire to grow a culture of learning and true growth mindsets, give permission to be seen as you're experimenting, growing, and learning. So how do you do that? It starts with you as the leader. Words are cheap, actions are gold. The best practices are go first. Model that vulnerability. It's a courageous choice to show that vulnerability, but how do you do that? Sometimes it's simply saying, I don't know. Setting the stage. We haven't been here before. We haven't done hybrid teams in this way before. We must invent new pathways. I don't have a playbook for this. Nobody does. Therefore, I need your help. We will figure it out together. One of my favorite recent examples of this, well, recent in the past year, was Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce. He was interviewed at the beginning of the pandemic shutdown, and he was asked, so Mark, you are an exemplary CEO. How are you going to lead Salesforce through this pandemic? And he said, I don't know. I've never led a company through a pandemic before. I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to ask for input, and we will figure it out, but I don't know. The power of being authentic and honest. But it's so difficult sometimes to be seen as wrong, to admit our mistakes, to talk about our failings. So think for yourself of what are some of those obstacles that get in the way. Enter into the chat box, please. What are some of those reasons that make it so difficult for you personally to admit mistakes. And I think what we'll find is that it's the same for most of us. Maybe it's a sense of pride, as Caroline says. And let's see, we have a more pride. Yeah, fear of showing weakness. So often we feel like if we admit mistakes, we're going to be seen as weak, as incompetent. I was giving a workshop on psychological safety to a group of very senior leaders at in McKinsey University, and it was a regional workshop. And one of the women raised her hand and she said, "Vulnerability? That's what they expect me to be. That's the last thing I'm going to show." And you know what? That's what the research shows. She's right. So it's not a matter of do you show vulnerability, but how? So there is a gender difference in perception of vulnerability. It doesn't mean not to show it, but how are you going to show it with everyone while maintaining that empowered stance where people still feel, not only still feel that they want to, that they believe in you, but they believe in you even more because you're being honest with the messy, because you're being straight with them, because you have the courage to show what's happening under the waterline. And so one way to do this is the way that the attitude towards mistakes, to admit mistakes, to treat them not as bad things, as failings, but as essential, interesting feedback. When I was in graduate school, my advisor, Ellen Langer at Harvard, used to say that mistakes are just interesting feedback. Just like success is interesting feedback. Success tells us what's working, mistakes tell us what's not working. And so I think one thing that helps with this is not seeing failure as binary, you either succeed or fail, but instead as a journey, a learning journey. And so what I recommend to people who feel like maybe their environment isn't 100% safe to admit mistakes or lead with vulnerability, well, share your mistakes, but importantly, don't forget to discuss and to share how these failures grew you into the person you are today. And so it's about this, is sometimes admitting mistakes is really revealing your hero journey, the way that you have met adversity with courage, with valor, met uncertainty with intentionality and choices. Okay, the third C of the 4 C's of psychological safety is co-elevate. Now, what do I mean by co-elevate? This is the action, the behavior of inspiring and empowering others to bring their best, not merely to cooperate with each other and cooperate with you, but to bring that care, to bring that inspiration, to bring that motivation where they want to not only succeed as an individual, but to be part of the collective success that rises all of us to a better nature, to a higher level. And so this, I believe, is the essence of leadership. Leadership is about influence. It's about one life influencing another. Khalil Gibran said that work is love made visible. When we feel a connection to a leader, a true leader, one that we will follow, one that we will go above and beyond, we love them, right? We love our work. This is a passion. This is a deep emotional. It reflects our values, our strengths. So not to underestimate the depth of this, that the task of a leader is not to get people to do what they're supposed to do or what you want them to do. It's not to make them great, but it's to elicit their greatness. For the greatness is already there. And your job as a leader is to inspire, empower, and clear the way so that they can bring their best ideas, to bring their strengths, and to perform at a high level. So how could you do this? How do you do this already? Some of the best practices that I offer you are: 1, express appreciation. Now, most leaders I talk to say, oh, I do that. And then I talk to their direct reports and they say, no, I don't actually feel that appreciated. I know that I'm probably appreciated, but I don't often hear it. So where's the disconnect? The disconnect is because most people give a really weak expression of appreciation. They say something like, hey, Karen, thanks for being the moderator. Thanks for helping out and support. Now, Karen, you'd probably say, great, I appreciate that. Good. But do you think that we can do better than that? I think we could. So what if instead, and this is genuine, Karen, I appreciate how you have been with me at each step here before and after, and you had an attention to details, and we're taking my perspective of what do you need in order to be fully equipped to show up and to deliver this session with at your best with whatever you need. Notice that I just specified the behavior. Also, Karen, the way that had an impact on me is that I was able to then relax and to know that whatever I needed, then I would be attended to, that I could depend on you and the rest of the team. And so that enabled me to bring out the, to be prepared, to feel prepared and to show up and have fun with it. And what I suspect is this represents a greater trait or strength for you that you do bring to all of your work. This is the first time I've worked with you, but I'm sure that you have a sense of teamwork and attention to detail. Now, Karen, how did that feel? I know I put
Well,
you on the spot.
I'm going to have a very big head after this. God help the people working in Fidelity. But no, I do think it is true that like calling out appreciation is a very good idea. I think you're bringing up so many good points, so we can summarize them at the end. But yeah, I certainly feel like, we did put a good bit of prep into this, so it does feel good to be called out on that.
Yeah, and so what I call this type of recognition is big appreciation. As an acronym, BIG, specify the B, behavior. Specificity builds credibility. I, identify the impact that that had on you as a person or on the project or on the team. In G, call out what you see in them, what you admire in them, if this is possible, and usually it is, where you can identify that this is not a one-off, but you can get at least a sense that there's a greater pattern or strength here. That's big recognition, that's emotion, that is recognition with impact. Okay, and also what most leaders believe they do quite well, but then you talk to people and they feel like they actually don't have as much input as they want, is the importance of soliciting input, actively soliciting input. Now, as the leader, when do you speak? I'm sure most of you in this group get this because you have high levels of psychological safety in your teams. Ask rather than tell. Leaders speak last, right? Because what happens when you speak first? It shuts down the conversation. Nobody wants to oppose you as you in the power position. So letting others have that floor first. And also what I call opening those silent boxes. So often there's an elephant in the room. There's something that's happening that we don't necessarily have the courage or the awareness to go and to bring into the forefront. Silent boxes are when someone is not speaking who actually likely has a input for this conversation. Thinking about what do people not have the courage to say right now? And so it's your job to give air cover for that candor because that candor is risky. It's inherently risky, right? And so protecting and making sure that you're following through and not giving that sort of slight or a tone that sometimes can slip through unintentionally. So I have some best practices here. There's a lot and I want to move on. So if you want to receive this list, then feel free to email me or to connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll send you this worksheet. but at a high level, it's how you ask matters. Reward when people give you hard feedback. A couple of examples I have here is this was a VP, very, very senior leader at a high tech firm. And his team members told me that when he would ask for input at the end of a meeting, he'd say things like, "Does anyone disagree? Before we move on, do you want to add anything?" How inspired do you feel? And then when people would give input, they'd be like, "I don't think so. No, defend, project." So although the words were saying, "I want to hear from you," the actions and the tone was saying, "I don't want to hear anything from you. Don't oppose," right? And so we have to be very careful, and I'm sure that these are more subtle ways, but sometimes we need to really give that fertile ground, that fertile environment, so that input can happen. Don't forget your quiet contributors. They may not be the ones that are going to speak up in the meeting, but they might have the more thoughtful and conscientious responses that you need to hear. So give them a pathway, give them a way to follow up. Okay. So also, I want to just run through this briefly before we take questions. And that is, I can send this to you as well as a worksheet. I wanted to bring out lots of things today, knowing that we can follow up over email. How does this apply to work from home teams? Well, that's a question for you to take on. No one has the answer here. So I don't have the answer. No one has the answer, but we have some ideas to think about. Set the scene. Just as we've talked about, this is new. We haven't been in this environment where there's work from home at a high level, at a broad scale. Lead the way. We can admit I don't have a clear plan for how hybrid teams are going to happen, but this is how I'm thinking about it. This is how I'm managing my own challenges with working from home and all the challenges that come with that. Know that trust takes time, and although we're going to have to bring in these conversations more and more, and as we have in the past year without any prep or warning, know that that it's tough to talk about these overwhelm and stress and complex home environments that make it difficult to show up at your best. Just like with that Google employee who said, I got 3 good hours. I'm sorry, that's the reality of it. And how does that happen? How can we talk about it? Now, of course, that's in a crisis situation, but sometimes it happens. It's just that he had the courage to say it when other employees might just continue on, only giving 3 hours, but not making that explicit. Share positive examples, just like recognition, just like co-elevate. Notice the 4 C's are embedded in these. Appreciate what and learn, co-elevate. Be a watchdog. When people do give input, when people do talk about things, don't let sort of subtle group think or group reactions that are well-intentioned shut it down. Even things like, "Oh, we miss you," or "We sure could use you here." How does that feel when you receive it, right? So make sure that you reframe those. They may be very well-intentioned. Allow people to say, "Yes, we do miss you." However, to guard against inadvertent pressures. So that's your homework. And I want to ask you, what are those small bet experiments that you're going to do, and when are you going to do it? Because if we just leave here today with some ideas, then I haven't done my job. And so I want to ask you, what are you going to do differently? So type it into the chat box. Now we have some chance also for some open-ended conversation and questions. So we have active appreciation. Excellent, bravo. That sounds great. Show vulnerability. Thank you, Karen. Okay. Talk last, Fergal. Thank you. So go out and and think for yourself, how could I up that level? There's no ceiling on psychological safety. Harriet says, talk last is excellent advice. We have several people here. Siobhan, not being the first person to speak. Inez says, listen more, talk less. It's such a simple thing, yet hard to do sometimes, right? It takes remembering. It takes it takes being intentional. Listen to the silence. Beautifully spoken, Ollie. Thinking, noticing the space between words. What's not being said. Say thanks more often, Grace. So what are, do we have a little time for at least a few questions, Karen?
We do have time, but I think people are being a little bit shy on the questions front. So I do have actually one or two questions myself, but I think that framework you put in place, like the 4 Cs, it is something you can practically use. Like I kind of thought for an hour session, what can I walk away with? And I definitely think there's stuff that we can walk away from that. So thank you very much, Laura, for that. Just in terms of kind of vulnerability, I was on a training course quite recently and it was about psychological safety and it was about showing, make sure you show your vulnerability because it makes you more human and it makes you more relatable to everybody. But do you notice a difference or in any of your experiments that, any kind of people are showing it more so according to race or gender or does that come into it or is it just generic? Like, are people shyer about showing it in a particular cohort?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's a very relevant question uh, for cross-cultural teams, right? And many of our teams, if not most of our teams these days, are global teams. And so having, first of all, that appreciation as you're bringing in that there are individual differences, there are cultural differences in this. And so the biggest way to kind of thing to keep in mind is that, at least an important thing to keep in mind is that we have to pay attention to that, to ask, to have that social awareness. And so knowing that vulnerability will be demonstrated in different ways from different people and in different cultures. So I don't believe there's a difference in showing vulnerability. There is a difference, a gender difference in perception of vulnerability. And all leaders need to do this. So it's a matter, again, of how. And knowing that, especially for input, can feel vulnerable for some people. Opposing ideas feels vulnerable. It feels like a risk. So appreciating that and making it easier when you are working with a particular style of person or a culture to assess. Um, and so you can think, for example, cultures where it's very accepted and encouraged and celebrated to be kind of in your face and it feels like it's arguing and people are very lively and animated and their voice is strong and their words are direct. That can feel absolutely uncomfortable and unacceptable and even offensive to some cultures and some people, right? So we must modify, we must attend to that. So I don't have an answer for you, except that's an excellent question to bring in to your discussions and your one-on-one, to be considering and to enter into your algorithm, your internal algorithm.
Fantastic, thank you. So I do have a question. I love the concept of are you with me or against me? How do you handle somebody that says I'm against you or doesn't actually say it but acts it?
Yeah, excellent point these are not often spoken, but they're felt and they are heard loud and clear oftentimes. So, manage it. Oftentimes when there is a real tension point, it's best to go one-on-one so that more of an authentic communication can happen rather than publicly dealing with conflict. And so be realistic. I'm not going to say like, oh, go into every environment as if it were safe, because sometimes there's psychological danger, right? And we must protect and defend, but to do it in a way that is not going into that silent box, that is not avoidance, but is instead taking radical responsibility, Radical self-responsibility means that you say, this is the situation. This is what I see. This is my perception. It may be more or less accurate, right? It's my perception. And how can I deal with that? So for example, I was working in a coaching situation with an executive at a consulting firm. And she said, my boss is not safe. I don't feel comfortable admitting mistakes. I'll be dragged across the coals for that. And so I said, do this thing of, it's not that if you defend and protect all the time, that's going to disempower you. So instead, take radical responsibility, stand tall in your vulnerability, and still you can say, perhaps, ways to say, I don't know, and I'm going to find out. I will learn. Of course I don't know. There's no shame or blame here. Of course I don't know. We've never been here before. We are all figuring this out. This is an exciting challenge. I am up for it. I have the capacity to learn, to grow, to allow this experience to build me to a higher level. So notice that tone, right? And so if someone is against you, then deal with it. Don't shrink or collapse, but instead take radical responsibility of how could I? And perhaps how could we? What is it that they're feeling threatened? How am I a threat to them? Maybe it has nothing to do with you, but maybe you are sort of the lightning rod for their insecurity.
Great point, Laura. So, Laura, we are at time, and I've just a compliment for you. There's no questions because your presentation has been so thorough. So, hence, we're very light in the conversation. I think we can take an awful lot from this. So, I really do appreciate it. I loved working with you. I hope our paths cross again, Laura. I know you've got kind of some details here just to wrap up in terms of your contact details. Somebody has asked for some examples. So, if you want to reach out to Laura, here's her details. She sent out some links on LinkedIn as well. On her LinkedIn profile is in this chat. So, feel free to copy it and everything. But I do want to call out and say thank you very much for today. I think it's been a fantastic learning experience for us all. So,
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
yeah, great. And a reminder for everybody, there's a couple of more sessions going on AtlanTec Festival, so feel free to check them out. And again, thanks to all our sponsors. We wouldn't be here today without all of that. So, thank you to everybody and especially Laura. Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.